Welcome to the final session of the day. I'm conscious that we're standing between you and alcohol, but you know what they say about delayed gratification and it's linked to intelligence. I'm pretty sure that only the really smart people will be here at the very end. So we have a great session lined up for you. My name is Stephen Debman. I'm Facebook's Global Deputy Chief Privacy Officer. I've been with Facebook just a year, and it was a year ago when I joined the company. On my first day, I actually came to this conference on my first day. So I can look back and reflect upon a year of interesting times at Facebook in the world of privacy. One of the things we did in the last year was we commissioned a program that was designed to look at really this sort of central question that we debate in pretty much every conversation we have at conferences like this. And that question is, how do we enable data about people to continue to drive innovation and new services and growth at the same time as not just building trust, but increasing the empowerment that people have over their lives, both online and offline. And most importantly, in trying to discuss that, is getting away from the notion that there has to be a trade-off between having privacy and not having great services, or having great services and not having any privacy. And our view is, at Facebook, is that A, that's not desirable, but neither is it necessary. And this program is really looking at finding the evidence for that case, that these things are mutually reinforcing. We can have great services and innovation and new business models that are empowering for individuals and put people in a position of control over their lives. And so that question of trade-off is at the center of this panel debate. And this panel debate is building upon the work that we've done with a very, very wide number of stakeholders from all disciplines, from academia, from entrepreneurship, large companies, small companies, policymakers, governments, over the last 6 months. And we'll be building upon some of the themes that we've learned so far. So our objective at Facebook in commissioning this was really to understand how we can really effectively solve many of the privacy problems that we debate every single day, and many of you will be debating every single day of your lives at conferences like this. And basically broaden the debate out from being one which is about rules and compliance and terms and conditions and privacy policies to a debate about how are people actually taking control of their data? How are they getting value from their own data rather than just organizations and companies and governments getting value from their data? What's the market doing to start to solve some of these challenges and problems around the way people use their data? How does disruption enter into the ecosystem to create new ways of creating value at the same time increasing trust and individual empowerment? Most importantly, what we wanted to do was not just set out with a set of solutions, but to make sure we're really asking the right questions. And so how we went about this was, in the summer of last year, we convened a series of roundtables in London where we got together a wide spectrum of experts from across a range of disciplines, a range of backgrounds, to do a number of things. And the first thing we asked them to do was try and describe the way the data-driven economy has evolved and some of the business models that have driven the growth of companies like mine, Facebook. We just had a big discussion about data for services like Facebook. And where do we think it's going? And having done that, we asked this expert group to then figure out what are the questions we need to answer. Don't answer them, just figure out the questions that we need to be answering. What we did after that then, and what we've been doing over the last 4 months, is a series of roundtables so far across Europe. We've had roundtables in Amsterdam, Paris, Berlin, Warsaw. We're going to Madrid next week to collect the views of, again, a wide range of stakeholders to try and start answering some of the questions that our expert group at the outset set out in our report. And that report's in the pack that you all picked up at the beginning. Next steps will be to move beyond Europe to Asia, and then Latin America, then North America, with a view to producing a report which reflects the views of this expert group in around April of this year. So starting to provide answers to the questions that the experts said these are the questions you should be asking if you want to broaden this debate out and try and find a sustainable way forward for the data-driven economy. And so with us on the panel, we have people who've participated in those roundtables, people who were selected because of their particular expertise and backgrounds and would add a very valuable contribution to trying to find a solution to some of these problems. So let me introduce them immediately to my left. First is Lionel Janin. He's head of digital affairs at Stragégie. Lionel is an economist specialising in issues of competition and regulation, currently working for Stragégie, which is a unit that provides expertise and advice to the French government to determine the directions for the nation and long-term objectives on matters of economics, social, cultural, and environmental development. To Lionel's left, we have Julian Ranger. Julian's the founder and chairman of a startup called DigiMe, which is a service that has a goal of enabling individuals to hold locally themselves all structured data relating to them to help them give perfect knowledge about themselves. The service has been commenced by helping users build a library of a library of themselves, accessing and downloading data on the individuals dispersed across the internet, including taking information from companies like Facebook. To Lionel's left is Frederick Richter, who's the president of Stiftung Daten schutz, a German privacy foundation. The foundation was set up in 2013 to strengthen awareness and education among German citizens of privacy issues and the management of personal data. And then to Frederick's left is Clare McKitrick, our moderator today from Ctrl-Shift. Ctrl-Shift are a specialist consultancy that believe in the potential of a new trusted information relationship between individuals and organisations, and one that gives individuals control over their permissions and the use of their data to better manage their lives. I've known Ctrl-Shift and Clare for some years from my previous role, and they were selected by Facebook specifically because of their unbridled knowledge in this field, particularly looking at the nature of the market and the way the market is evolving. And we've worked with them to convene this program as an independent source of expertise to marshal the conversation and add value to the output we get. So I'm going to hand over to Clare now, who's going to moderate this session. We have about 50 minutes of discussion, and then we will have Q&A. You'll all be here because you're all super smart people who can delay your gratification for alcohol. So I'll hand over to Clare. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Stephen. I'm going to skip past the introductions because I think you did a great job on behalf of all of us there. So I'm going to get straight into what we build as the point of this session, which was to share some of the insights from this exercise. So as Stephen mentioned, in your conference bag, you each have a copy of the original report we produced. That contains the questions that Stephen referred to. So it's really setting the context for the discussions we have in the roundtables, the ones that we've held so far. But since then, in December, we've produced a shorter report, which is available on the Facebook stand here in the village hall there, which lets you know what are the emerging themes from each of the European roundtables. As Stephen said, it's important that we get a global view on these issues. It's very easy to get stuck into a US versus Europe type privacy dichotomy, and we want to get a set of views that can help us drive what is really a global issue and a global debate and a global challenge. So that's why Stephen mentioned we're heading to further locations, and I've got a list of those at the end in case you or colleagues in those regions are interested in getting involved in the process. So I'm going to just focus a little bit on the main question we posed and we structured the first report around. And for those of you who were in the previous session, Yin mentioned this one as well, Yin from Facebook. The question is about sustainable maximisation of the benefits of the data economy, both for individuals and for the organisations who provide them with services. Sustainably is about protecting human values, but also ensuring that the relationship is trustful and that services are trusted sufficiently that they are used. That's really in the economic interests of the organisations who provide services that they continue to be used. So it's the case that we need to have trust and growth. And as Stephen said, we've been testing the thesis that it's possible to have both. There is no real trade-off. Okay. Is everyone okay to hear me now? Yep. Okay, so in pages 20 to 21 of the report, just to highlight that we have illustrated 4 potential scenarios. You will find aspects of these scenarios in operation in various territories at any particular time, but for the purposes of the report, we were trying to plot some potential ways forward. None of us can guarantee the way the data economy is going to evolve or our attitudes may evolve, but what we saw was that there was the potential to have an adaptation scenario where we as individuals become used to the ways in which our data is being used by organisations, and we become comfortable with the way that they are protecting our data, and what is currently a bit of a storm around personal data subsides. That's one potential scenario. The second is that the way organisations are handling data leads to more and more turbulence. I was in a session earlier where someone described a situation of privacy by disaster. You can just see a number of disasters perhaps creating more turbulence within the market, and that creating more fear amongst individuals about how their data is used. That's not a great situation for anyone in the market. The third scenario is one of regulatory lockdown, and that's one where policymakers and regulators feel that they have no choice but to take punitive measures against what they see as abuses of data. And then finally, the fourth scenario is one of diversification, and that's really one that we're exploring in the panel today. Because in that scenario, we're painting the picture of the potential for a new data relationship between individuals and the organisations who provide services to them. And that's a relationship that has a number of shifts, as I've illustrated on the slide there. So one that goes from information being in the hands of the organisation to one where information is managed by individuals, where the data is seen as a corporate asset to one where we see our data as a personal asset for us to be able to use. And we have, as Stephen mentioned, Julian on the panel today who can illustrate some of the ways in which he's trying to bring that kind of service about. So that was the nature of our first report. The second gives you some of the themes that are emerging from the EU series. And I've got on screen here some of the major themes and some of the quotes from those sessions. So the first was a really strong call for collaboration between participants in the data-driven economy. So clearly, during the process of negotiating the GDPR, there's been a lot of rumour, there's been a lot of public debate. Now that we're in an implementation mode, it's really important that the players start to work together to design a regime that is going to be effective and is actually going to achieve the outcomes the regulators intend. So participants across a number of roundtables strongly made the point that parties really need to work together. It needs all of us, all of our brains on this to get the solutions right. The second theme picked up was one of the value exchange. So we focus a lot on key issues like consent and terms and conditions. And a number of the participants felt that actually we need to move away from focusing on specific issues and actually talk about the broad fairness of the deal and to bring that front and centre of the agreement to use a service. So the value exchange and the need perhaps to rebalance it is the second theme we've picked up. The third is about seeing control as the potential for an opportunity within the market. So this was mentioned in the session just before this. We were talking about the clash, the perceived clash between innovation and data protection. So a number of the participants in our roundtables actually pointed out we don't see this as an issue. We actually see it as a market opportunity. If you can provide control and convenience and a great service at the same time, everyone wins. And they're really experimenting and iterating on the way to make exercising control easy for their users. The fourth is transparency, education and data literacy. A fairly common theme across the roundtables was people saying, let's stop pretending that what we have now works. It doesn't. We've got to find new ways through this. Terms and conditions model is fundamentally broken. It's up to us to try and find a way to make it better. And the final theme is one of industry leadership. So a number of the participants from industry actually said it's time for us to step up to the plate. We actually need to start designing solutions. We shouldn't wait for someone to impose things on us. We need to be part of the solution. And we have an ecosystem here. If we are working to make sure that there is positive action in the ecosystem, there's a lot we can achieve that's important to regulators about protecting privacy and stamping out bad practice within the industry ourselves. So why not crack on with that? So that's a quick canter through the major themes. Because we have here panellists who've participated in different sessions. Lionel was in Paris, Julian was in our London session, and Frederick in Berlin. They haven't previously had the chance to exchange their views on what they heard. And I've put together a few questions just to shape the conversation. So it may be the case, often we find in the roundtables, that people aren't really that familiar with the types of new solutions that are emerging to provide control in a convenient way. So the first question centres on that. What types of market solutions are emerging? And what business models do they employ? Because a lot of the noise around digital services we have today comes from the fact that they all most of them adopt a common model of advertising to raise revenue. So that raises some of the issues that we've been talking about in the sessions today already. So are there alternative models and alternative ways of doing things? Second question will be about what those types of solutions and their emergence means for policymakers and regulators. And finally, the industry leadership question I just touched on there. What could industry do? What more could it do to try and ensure that it is working to achieve solutions that are practical, that do meet the concerns that regulators and policymakers have? So the first one I'm going to start off with Julian, because he has a business that is trying to do exactly this, put users in control.
Yes, thank you very much for that. So I'm the chairman and founder of DigiMe, and we're a company all about returning control to the individual. Now, we're not the only company in the space, though, so we need to think about what are all the companies in my space trying to do. And the key here is they're not just trying to be what you might think a privacy solution just for the individual, but all of us see that there are two sides. So we agree, if you like, with the various premises put up here, that actually, as individuals, we like to be sold to. As individuals, we like to engage and interact and share. But the question is, how can we do it where we control the data, and how can we do it so we get maximum value? So now, if you think of the GDPR, which I like a lot, there's 4 fundamental principles: privacy by control, by design, explicit permission, data portability, and right to forget. And the key one is data portability. We have the ability to get all of our data back. So myself, DigiMe, in the US, you've got UMA, you've got CitizenMe, you've got Miko, you've got the Key framework, lots of companies all thinking about that. So I'll think about myself, because obviously I know my business the best, but what we do is we use that data portability, and we haven't had to wait for the GDPR. Companies like Facebook have allowed us to download on behalf of our users information since 2009. So what we do is we allow you to download an app onto your own device, and it goes and gets all your data from different places, whether that's social, banking, health, or whatever, and you build your own library. So you really own your data, and then you really control it. But interestingly, you can do more with it yourself, know more about yourself, and then businesses will come to you. Now, why will they come to you rather than going around the back? Because you've got the best repository. If you've got all your data, it's rich. It's not thin, which is what it is today, and wrong, and people today have problems associating the different feeds with you. You've got the richest, best data set. So now they'll come to you because it's better. And the value exchange is exactly that. It's a value exchange. It doesn't have to be selling your data. It's what we call service, convenience, or reward. So we manage a certificate system whereby companies say what they're going to get, or asking for, what the value exchange is, and what they're going to do with the data. That's the explicit permission and right to forget piece. Now, the interesting thing about that is it's infinitely better for businesses because they get this rich data, which is wider, deeper, 100% accurate, and as it happens, all normalized. And so what happens is a business can do more. So, for example, we are working in the health area and able to, there's a good example in the States where all your data is scattered around, you can bring all your health data together in one place, combine it with your wellness data from Fitbits, etc., combine it with anything else, including your social and everything, and now people can give you great new health solutions, which, by the way, could be 100% private because you don't actually have to let the data go out of your device. And that's the key. You can have privacy while still exchanging your data, while still being in control. Health is one area. You can do it across almost any area. And businesses will actually come to you. Now, here's the interesting thing that we believe. As more and more businesses come to you direct, the money that is spent around the side in the things that a lot of us would object to will slowly leach out of the system because it's going to come direct, because they get better data far cheaper. And therefore, just by pure economic effects, there'll be less money for stuff to be leached around the side. More directly, you will end up in a more private world. And that's the promise that we're giving, UMA and lots of others are giving. And as far as the business model goes, no one's selling your data. So DigiMe, our business model is we don't hold your data, we don't see it even, and we don't even touch it. So what we are is your librarian, which we don't charge for. And when you decide that somebody else can see your data, we charge a small postal fee, 10 cents, thereabouts. And it's just a postal fee, it's not a commission or anything else. And so you don't even have to charge for data to completely change the way the model works. You can meet 100% of the GDPR provisions. Companies like Facebook and Google, the ones that often get a lot of criticism, can use that. They're already giving the data back as it happens. versus any other new company in the world. So it's an interesting idea. Have a look. Look at UMA, as I said, look at Citizen.me, Miko. There's a large number of companies all doing the same thing, which really puts you back in control, but then promotes innovation. It doesn't inhibit innovation by having privacy. It absolutely promotes it. And the sort of final point that I'll make is we talk about it being two-sided. The individual having control, businesses giving back the data and then asking you for the data, but actually the same applies to the government. Governments are just as importantly covered by the GDPR. They've got to give back your data, whether that's your health data or your tax data or everything else, so that you have control of that and can work from there.
So that's a big potential stimulation of the market, is opening up the government-held data sources for a proposition like yours. Lionel, we had quite a few of these types of businesses at our Paris roundtables, and actually the quote I showed about control being a market opportunity comes directly from the session I think you participated in. Just wonder if you can give us your perspective on the innovation in this space that you're seeing, and how you feel about the emergence of these solutions versus the ones that are common today.
Yeah. So good afternoon. Well, one thing. So I'm not an entrepreneur, rather an analyst of these changes. And with I've been a regulator in the past in the telecom area, so I'll have this broad perspective. I think the example we've heard about managing your own personal data is very interesting. And I think there's some examples also in Paris, as you mentioned, about this companies trying to focus on providing solutions, so making money and being able to develop their own business and ensuring proper management of personal data. The global ecosystem is, and the French tech ecosystem is trying to develop along those lines. Examples that we've met in the Paris meeting were the Quant search engine that is trying to provide this functionality without using only the request the words you're searching and not the whole history. There was also someone from Dashlane, which was trying to improve the management of password, which is one way to ensure that people have a good management of the data they are spreading in different websites, because in each case you're requested to provide your password, and this is an example where if you have a leak somewhere, there's a risk that it happens in other websites if you're using the same password. So ensuring proper password management is one way for individual to keep separate profiles if they want to do so, at least to manage this in a proper way. Another example, which is Cozy Cloud, which is providing cloud services where you actually dealing with you're actually managing the cloud system, and once again it's turned about around the individual being the one managing the data. So in all those cases, I think a bit like the example Julian provided us with, you have companies trying to develop using this value of privacy and privacy management with different business models and different perspectives. Either dealing with just we're providing traditional services like search engine, or really trying to get the data close to the individual. One thing that strikes me is that is there actually a desire for those services? Well, it's difficult to say because in some cases it seems that people are very okay to provide their personal data. In other cases, they need to be confident to provide them. But the good point that when you have those companies developing those solutions, you can let the market decide about are those solutions very useful. As Julian mentioned, we can have a shift in value if the people start using those services, and the market can be reorganized along those lines. And as we'll have more data, thanks to the Internet of Things, thanks to new, probably a new scaling up of data, of personal data, of any kind of data, it's very good to have different solutions addressing the issues related to this personal data management. And in the end, as I have public policy perspective, I think it's good for regulators because it's providing lots of solutions, and you have markets providing, well, changes in the way people are dealing with their data. And it's working because you have new business models, but it's also providing incentives for any companies because they have to adapt to these new offers, and in some cases provide more powers to the individuals. I think it's good that technology is providing part of the answer, providing new tools to manage this personal data.
Frederick, a lot of the focus on German innovation in this space has been more towards the lockdown end of the technology, so lots of encryption, software investment technology. What do you see about the potential for these sorts of solutions to be popular in your market?
Well, in Germany we have a very interested people because encryption is well known in Germany, but not well used, not often used. The amount of encrypted emails rose from 14 to 15%, I read. So perhaps encryption with all its complexity is not the fast solution. And other solutions, alternative approaches have to be known by the politics, by the regulators as well, because you only can foster what you know. So I don't think that entrepreneurs like Julian can bring politics to act more innovative in their instruments. It was asked what innovative instruments how can they be brought into policy making? But what startups can show are good examples of protecting privacy in a very new way, perhaps, and because politics have to rely on the experience with users' behavior that the companies have. So it's not about the companies to wait for politics to act or react on innovative things that are, in the politicians' view, are too fast, too avant-garde, perhaps, so they have to be slowed down by regulation. But these good examples, these new approaches have to be explained very well to them.
Stephen, did you want to jump in and add anything? Because you've been tracking this market, as you said before, you joined Facebook as well as in your time there.
Yes. Well, let me just start off with a kind of very personal reflection and going back to when I started, first met Ctrl-Shift and started thinking about these issues. I'm a lawyer by background. I'm now doing kind of policy, so I live in the world of law and policy. And the conclusion I came to a long time ago was that privacy and personal data is far too important to leave to the lawyers. When you leave it to the lawyers, we don't end up in a very good place in any field of life. And so having worked in this area for so many years, it feels to me that it's just devoid of innovation and creativity and investment. And the problems that we're talking about week in, week out, these kind of conferences, aren't going to get solved by another checkbox or another set of terms and conditions or making them clearer and so on and so forth. Problems get solved by people investing energy and resource and creativity. Businesses, I mean, public sector does that too, but generally speaking, most of these sort of problems get solved by businesses. Businesses solve problems every day related to how do I get my product from the factory to the consumer? How do I make sure my consumer is buying a really complicated product like a car? How do they understand how to drive the car? They don't do it through terms and conditions. They do it by thinking about design. They study people's behavior. They look at how their eyes track the road to make sure there are no obstacles in the screen and so on and so forth. They invest energy in innovation and creativity to solve those problems. That is not generally being given to the problem of privacy. And the reason why is I think that we kind of look back over the years is that the data-driven economy is really, really young. And so companies like mine, which are completely data-driven, we don't charge consumers, we use information to make ads relevant, and that's how we fund Facebook and enable it to be free at point of use, is still very, very early. And we're seeing, with services like Julian's, that market evolve. What's enabling it to evolve is people are becoming more sophisticated. We have smartphones now, we didn't have them a few years ago. We use social media. We do some funky stuff on social media, sharing stuff about our lives. So people are changing and businesses are responding to that. that seems to me to be a really important signal. It says that the business community, innovation and investment and venture capital is beginning to flow into this area to solve these problems by getting businesses to really see this as an opportunity. And I think that was my thesis, that if that could be encouraged and not discouraged, then we'll start to see some really, really cool solutions to problems that have been a kind of perennial issue in the debate about privacy and data protection.
Great. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question now, because we've had mixed views when we asked this within the roundtable. So does the emergence of these types of solutions mean that policymakers or regulators should be adjusting their approach in any way? Should they be trying to stimulate the emergence of these? Should they be paying attention to them? Or should they be focusing their attention on where there are the current major problems? So the question really is, should the approach adjust in any way? And I'm going to ask Lionel first, given that he's got a regulatory background, to give us his thoughts on this. Yeah,
so on this aspect, the general idea would be probably that there are two main questions on a long-term perspective, climate change and digital transformation. And the digital transition is going to change, everything, and it's very recent, as you mentioned. So I'm pretty sure that in the long-term perspective, it's going to apply to regulation too, meaning that you'll end up with a regulation which will be data-driven or using the DNA of the digital economy, being able to innovate, to incorporate the feedback of the users. All those elements that are making changes happening so rapidly in lots of aspects of our lives, I think they'll apply in the end to regulation. One thing that changes are taking place very rapidly. Technology is changing. What people are doing right now is not what they were doing a few years ago. You've heard that hundreds of times, but still, the mobile revolution is less than 10 years old, and it has changed completely the way people interact, and even the way you can understand internet regulation, probably because the interaction is not the same. The possibility to locate where people are and the kind of interaction is changed by this device. And I was mentioning that the next steps, we'll see how it develops. The Internet of Things is probably going to provide an additional revolution when coupled with artificial intelligence and providing new services and new interactions. So the problems are going to be fairly different in a few years' time, and probably we won't be able to afford waiting for another 10 years for an update of the regulation. The second aspect, that you have lots of technological aspects in this changes, because some of the transformation are coming from technology. I was mentioning artificial intelligence, deep learning, APIs, all those buzzwords, they have a technical content, and the proper way to regulate them means that you need some understanding. So probably you're going to end up with more exchanges between regulators and businesses to understand those business models. It has always been the case that you need to understand what you're regulating, but I think there's a case for more exchanges about those changes. And of course, another aspect is that regulators, and the law are not natural innovators. They are developed to enforce the law, and you don't expect them to change all the time. And it's good it's good for them to react this way. But in any case, I think it's going to change because they'll have to, and then you need to invite new tools, probably be an enforcement. We are designing a GDPR that is supposed to be future-proof, so I hope it's going to be this way. So in the end, it's going to come down to the implementation, to how people apply those those regulation, I'm pretty sure they'll end up there will be a need for less uniform enforcement, probably more experiments, even in the enforcement of the regulation. And of course, the condition for that to work is that there's a need for transparency, so that of course you still have regulation that people are satisfied with. And there's a need for political support at a broad term, because if you allow more smart regulation, which is advocated in an earlier panel discussion, then you need to accept more failures. And accepting failure in legal enforcement is something that is quite new. So in the end, you need lots of bodies to change for those smart regulation to emerge and this collaboration to take place. But I think it's the way forward.
Julian.
It's interesting that if we look back over technology and computers for the last 30 years, things happen in cycles and big shifts occur. And the trouble with what we're trying to do sometimes on the privacy side is apply a band-aid to the existing system and keep applying more band-aids rather than thinking about an innovative shift. And so for me, if there is a huge demand for anything in the market will respond. So I am responding to a perceived need, and that's why myself and my investors are doing what we're doing in the business. And we're not putting a band-aid, we're shifting the market completely. And so when it comes to regulators, I think it's important in this area that the principles are outlined, but we don't go down too far to trying to make everything a band-aid on the existing system, or else we do actually sometimes inhibit the innovation because we tie things up. That's why I like to think of the GDPR as only 4 things, which I mentioned earlier, because it's simple, and then I can innovate within that and create something new. Now, it may be right, I may be the right shift in the marketplace, or it may be somebody else. But I think we have to think that innovation is the key, and regulators need to look out there, not necessarily understand everything because technology moves so fast, but specify the principles and then ask for innovation and provide the ability for innovators then to sort of say, this is how we think it will be solved. And I actually do think that the shift that is coming with the individual owning and controlling will be that shift. And I do think it will solve a lot of things, but then there'll be some new things to be solved, and on we will go in cycles.
So
I think it's a problem of very incompatible time schedules when you see the innovation in the market and the lawmaking. The GDPR was written in 2012 in most parts and will be effective by 2018. How long are 6 years in your business?
A very long time, and that's the point. We intend to shift the market by the middle of next year, and that's with really big companies doing things. And in fact, the funny thing is, and I can't say where, but we're actually encouraging some nations to adopt the GDPR much faster than they would otherwise do, because it will stimulate innovation.
it's in your interest to ensure that takes place with data portability. Okay, so we talked a little bit there about the potential for collaboration, and perhaps that collaboration hasn't been ultra present over the last few years as the regulation is being drafted. So now that we're in an implementation regime, what are the opportunities for collaboration? Is it realistic to think that there might be a process through which industry, academics, consumer advocates, companies can come together and design solutions to the problems that GDPR is trying to resolve? Stephen, I'll ask you first, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so clearly there's a role for collaboration. Let's also recognise that there's a role for things that aren't collaborative. So collaboration is needed where we're looking at things like, within the existing framework of the GDPR, there's lots that's vague and a lot that's unclear, not defined and sorted out. Collaboration doesn't necessarily solve all of those things. One thing that does solve some of those things is iteration and creativity, innovation, and allowing flexibility for solutions, the sorts of things that Julian's been talking about, coming up ways of solving problems, and possibly creating new problems in the process, and having a regulatory framework that recognises that there should be a little bit of failure if you're going to move things forward, as Lionel just said. And then there are other areas where it seems to me that there is room for collaboration, particularly for those who are guardians of making sure that the law and the policies and the principles are are adopted to collaborate with those who work to solve problems, and that can be companies, but it can be academics, it can be scientists who are solving some of these problems, to give them the kind of encouragement to operate within a framework that seeks to find solutions to these problems that can be endorsed. And so certainly in Europe with the GDPR, there's an opportunity to really do that, and not do the thing that our kind of muscle memory tells us to do, which is we need to write more rules. The way to get this solved is write more prescriptive rules, solve the problem from the outset, and that's it. That won't produce things that feel good to us as consumers or citizens. And I'm convinced that collaboration across the spectrum, depending upon the context and depending on the issue, whether between companies, academics, regulators, etc., will be a big part, should be a big part of starting to find solutions which really feel good to us as citizens and consumers.
The interesting thing is, going forwards, governments aren't passive members of this. They're not looking on as business does its stuff and business interacts with consumers. They're an active participant in the personal data economy. They've got our health data. They want to reduce the costs of health. They need businesses and individuals to do more with the data. The same with all government services as we try and do better with them. So I actually think the collaboration is an absolute necessity, and governments now got to think internally and say, we are a business in their own sense with their individual things. How do we now hold data? How do we interact with these people? So in fact, the interesting thing is, if governments start thinking about it, they are the same as the businesses that otherwise at the moment they might think that they're controlling. They've got the same problem on their side. So collaboration is forced because governments have got to actually do the same thing.
Frederick, you've got a different sort of collaboration challenge in Germany, haven't you?
Me personally, I agree just with the set that there is a need for collaboration. Of course, there is not such a good experience in Germany with self-regulation, so it would be not of that good success to promote self-regulation. There are two little examples for working models of that in the past in Germany. But co-regulation, collaboration is, of course, the only thing that might include companies at an early stage of lawmaking, but it has to be proposed by them. I think it's not such a good way to wait for politics to invite companies after a problem has been seen. Perhaps it's a good way to propose solutions before a problem is seen by politics.
So industry being a little bit more preventative, understanding what the goals are and proposing solutions before.
That gives a more positive picture of companies being interested in solutions and not waiting for politics to react.
Okay. And Julian, you mentioned at the start some of the work in this area, UMA. There's been previous attempts to do things like privacy icons, privacy seals, common terms and conditions. I mean, there's a lot of material out there. What do you think about the prospects for some of that actually coming into life again now that we have the regulation?
Well, there's actually quite a lot of movement from all of the companies trying to find solutions to get together, so customer commons and things like that. UMA, there's sort of various working groups in the US, the Internet Identity Work Group and all the rest of it, where people are trying to come up with some of these solutions in a common way that multiple companies that are competing, but we can all use together. My own view is we can sometimes be too academic. So you can keep looking at something, keep picking away at it and looking at the detail until you just try it. And when you try it and then see the reaction and then iterate to improve it. So we're certainly full steam ahead, but what we're trying to do is we give everything that we're doing into these working groups as suggestions. We constantly iterate as we get feedback from those working groups and others are doing it. So UMA could be seen as a competitor to what we're doing, but in fact we're very cooperative, and it's the same with all the companies I mentioned. And that's because the scope of the world is so large, there's plenty of room for us all. So I do think that sometimes we can all be too theoretical. Rubber has to hit the road. We have to do something, see, iterate, change, and go round it. And that's the way it will work. So I personally believe that it's relatively easy to summarize 20, 30 pages of terms and conditions to something that an individual can do. And we've done that and we're having some success with it, but others disagree. But we'll only tell as more and more people try these things and they work it out.
Some of the participants said that they felt that the organisations with the closest relationship with the users had to bear most responsibility when it came to trying to weed out poor practice when it comes to data, and for setting standards that are high for the whole of the ecosystem to follow. So, Stephen, as a company with a close relationship with many, many users around the world, what's your reaction to that perception? Do you think there is a need for some leadership and standard setting, or do you think that it will be small companies like Julian's who really start to generate interest and excitement and the market can move together? It's not reliant on the big ones to start.
Yeah, so I think for large companies that have that close relationship with the end user, inevitably, I mean, as you can tell from this conference, companies like mine get a lot of attention just because we're big and we're there and you're in your face. So naturally, with that comes a responsibility. So I think it's inevitable that certainly large brands that have that very privileged status of having a large number of users and having that relationship will kind of pick up the burden of leadership in a sense. And by doing so, and because large organisations, particularly if you look at aspects of the internet ecosystem, they are ecosystems, and in any ecosystem there are large players from which many others feed and depend. And so large companies can play that role in the ecosystem to kind of create better standards, either through kind of requirements or through kind of leadership and encouragement. But that doesn't place the that doesn't mean to say that large companies will be the innovators in this area. Like anything, the innovators come from the fringes. They always do. And they challenge the norm and they challenge the status. And so I think you'll see the impetus coming from companies that are basically saying, actually, we're looking at this space and we can see opportunity. We think there's opportunity here to do something that hasn't been done before that will create value for us and value for our users in a new way. And that will. We're seeing that happen now. There's plenty of evidence of already happening. That's stimulating many, many large companies, not just in the online space, but in the offline space and bricks and mortar businesses, to really rethink through that relationship with their end users and say, hang on, if we don't figure this stuff out, we've got this kind of privacy problem lurking, if we don't figure out the big data problem, et cetera, but there are plenty of other companies that are really innovating around this and solving problems in ways that create completely new value. And if we don't figure this out, they will, and they'll be bigger than us in a few years' time.
Well, I think when you ask if it would be good that the biggest player in the market sets the standards, many lawmakers would oppose strongly in democratic countries because they say, no, that would be a kind of Darwinistic version of code is law, that the biggest set the standards of how to achieve this compromise we're looking for. But of course you can say those with the closest relationship or the most users, the closest relationship to all these users have not the most responsibility in legal sense, but the most possibility to know how users act because they know their users' behavior better than regulators do. And this practical experience has to be used in a way, in a good way. Of course, users who have only the possibility to do this, I agree with all, in brackets, take it or leave it, take everything, or go to another service, which in some areas is not that easy. Perhaps that would be a possibility to use this huge user number to go beyond this, the choice is only 1 or 0. Perhaps at that way there lie many possibilities.
Some increments in between, yeah. I'm just going to briefly touch on one of the topics on which there was less consensus amongst the roundtables, and that's that of digital literacy and education. Because it was a pretty much 50-50 split across the 100 people we've involved so far. 50% thought that actually there was a lot more that could be done. We need more education. We need to teach users exactly how the tech works, and once they have that complete understanding, they will be empowered. And other people, the other 50%, saying, I don't want to know how the tech works, and I don't think we should impose that requirement on individuals. When we get into our cars, we don't question exactly what's going on between the fuel pump and the rest of the car. When we get in a plane, we trust that someone has qualified the pilot, and we don't go and do our own check on all of the facilities. So it was really interesting that there were these directly contrasting views, and we had basically a 50-50 split. Some people thought that education and data literacy would solve all the problems, and other people said that's a distraction. So reactions from the panel.
I'd like to actually use the Volkswagen thing as an example here, because I'm actually right in the middle. I'm going to sit right on the fence. And why is that? Because I think a certain number of people want to know how it works and will bother educating them system and work it, and others just want an easy life. And we have to look at both. But the wonderful thing about the world is that those that do care will find out if things are going wrong and will make a noise, and that's how Volkswagen got found out. Right? I didn't know. I've driven Volkswagens. I hadn't got a clue. I'm happy driving. And then somebody says, ooh, I want to care about the detail. And they dive down and they dive down and they dive down, and then they find out the detail, and then they declare it to the world. So I think we're perfectly able to have all sides of this spectrum.
Frederick, since Volkswagen is a German company.
Yeah. No, I don't want to stay with Volkswagen, but perhaps with another example from this automotive scene. Most drivers want to rely, or they do rely, on the functioning of their airbag, on their anti-skid braking system. They don't need perfect comprehension of how it works in the details, but they have to rely on the manufacturer, of the vendor of this car, of the system, and they cannot rely, they cannot put all their trust in this vendor if there is at least a small amount of transparency. So trust without transparency, that's very hard to achieve. So we have to think of simplification in some ways. There are some who want to read all the whole privacy policy, pages and pages and pages, and then they're very smart, and perhaps they find something and give it to Wired or someone else. But most of them want to have it convenient, but they want to have at least some small notion what is being done with the data that belongs to them or which depends. Perhaps some kind of executive summary at the top of the privacy policy. All these symbols, these simplifying icons that the GDPR suggested, but then it wasn't in the final text. But I think this is a field for innovative solutions.
Any reactions before we go to the audience?
Yeah, just to say that I suppose people would, this mixed view about education and literacy is probably coming from the fact that as an advisor to the French government, I would strongly recommend improve the literacy of the average population, because I think it's very useful for, lots of just for informed decisions from people understanding what is going on average, and then for even economic development, you need some people to have some skills in those digital area. But then, of course, you don't want. Lots of people won't be interested in understanding what is actually happening, and then for those people, you want regulation to be able to protect them, even if they don't understand. And that's one reason why you can't let just the business decide to say, okay, I'm doing everything, and it's everything fine because everything is transparent. You still have some people who won't be able to understand that, who won't spend some time to understand that, and they'll, I suppose, within our society would accept that they are entitled to a certain level of protection, and that's one reason why I suppose regulators would intervene, even to correct some kind of market failure on the fringe, or for people who don't understand, don't care, but you would say, okay, you're entitled to a certain level of protection, and regulation is providing you with that. And of course, for most people, transparency, self-provided solutions from the business will do, but for some people, maybe it won't be sufficient, and then it's good to have regulation saying, okay, you are entitled to a standard, even if you don't understand, even if you don't have the knowledge, and even if you don't care, in a way, because I suppose you can't let people outside those set of protection we've decided collectively.
Thanks, Lionel. So we've got time for some questions now from the floor. If I could just ask you to keep them brief and state who you are and where you're from, just to help the panel anchor the questions. Wow. No one's had a burning... Yeah, everyone's tired at the end of the day. Okay, well, I'm just going to continue on a little bit on one of the other themes from the roundtables, which we haven't covered in a huge amount of depth, and that's related to the transparency issue and cognitive load that you just mentioned. So transparency can be a trap as well. There's no point making 50, 60-page policies transparent and saying that you've done a great job on transparency if you're not trying to create meaning from the content. And we had a behavioural scientist in the Paris session who talked about the cognitive load being a real issue, and that's a source potentially of innovation. How do services that look at creating great user experiences every day try to bring transparency, education to the level where it is useful and not overwhelming for users? Julian, I know you've got, you feel that you've started to try and refine this down to a core number of questions. Do you want to just talk briefly about your approach to transparency?
Yes, and I think we do. Everyone who's ever summarised a book, summarised a paper, summarised anything, a disservice to say we can't summarise 30 pages of terms and conditions or 5. We spend our lives summarising things. So of course we can summarise them. Is it 100% complete? No. But is it good enough? Yes. So DigiMe, and a little advert, if you go to digi.me/video, you'll see me using a pack of cards, which describes what we do. And we have a permissioned access certificate, and we summarise everything with 6 questions. What information does someone want for a specific purpose? Now that's quite detailed information. It's not just your tweets or whatever. What are they going to do with it? What are they going to give me back, the value exchange? What are they going to keep on their servers, if anything? What will they share with third parties and why, if anything? And will they implement right to forget? Now, they're the 6 main things we're interested in. Now, if we're interested in some more levels of detail, we can go. But in general, that will do for each specific purpose that we do. And that gives most people the ability to say yes or no with sufficient control and cognitive load. Now, whether those 6 end up being the final 6, there's work, as I said, in customer commons, led by Doc Searles, who did the intention economy and things. And I think that they're on 5, but with 3 sub-pieces to each of the 5. It'll be around that line, but please, let's not think that we can't summarise something. We've done it all the time.
So, Stephen, Facebook has had to iterate quite a lot on the user experience of things like privacy checkup and ad preferences. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think it's just going back to the point I made earlier that solving these problems is not, I mean, obviously we can do a lot of summarising and making things simpler, but solving the problem of explaining something complicated to somebody when it's a thing they're trying to use and understand its impact for them is complicated. There are people who spend their whole lives studying some tiny aspect of how a person interfaces with the machine. And those sorts of people need to spend their time thinking about these problems. So we've done a number of things that try to do what Julian said in terms of making things simpler, so summarising our privacy policies, but we don't think actually that the privacy policy is where people kind of get most of their information from when they're using Facebook. So we build tools into Facebook to give people a level of control which is contextual, it's in the moment, that enables them to understand what they're doing. So, when you're posting information, there are a range of little tools that our scientists and engineers spend a lot of time and a lot of research nuancing just to make sure that it works in the best possible way, and we iterate and we iterate and we iterate to make sure it works. And we're still at the very beginning of that journey. And Facebook's probably more advanced than any other company on the planet because this is such a big issue for us. Another area is around ads. A lot of people have questions about ads on internet companies like Facebook and Google and so on. What data are you using, and how do you know that about me? Isn't that a bit spooky? So we created a tool called Ad Preferences. Other companies have started to create these tools too that enables the user to click on the ad, ask a question, why am I seeing this ad? And then to see the information that we have that says, we're showing you this ad because of this information we have about you. That may be wrong. If it's wrong, you can correct it. In fact, you can get rid of that information so you don't see any tailored ads to your personal preferences. And we get a very good level of usage of that tool. But working out how people are prepared to spend time using these things is hard. It requires real investment and real engineering. And that's something that we're committed to doing. And we think that the way to solve these problems is not just through kind of stipulating what a privacy policy should say, but actually to invest in figuring out how to convey that kind of complex information to people in ways that is meaningful for them, that enables them to make sensible choices.
Okay, so we mentioned moving on to other parts of the world, and I just wanted to highlight here, in case this is of interest to you or colleagues or contacts you know, that these are our upcoming locations. So Madrid on the 9th, and then we're heading off to the States, to Brazil, and then to Hong Kong. So if you do know anyone who might be interested in participating, please go to the Facebook stand. They have my cards there, Clare from Ctrl-Shift. So if you take one of my cards and get in touch, I'll be able to talk to you about the possibilities of joining. Each of the roundtables is cross-disciplinary. We have, it's very important that we have the right mix of participants. So we have policymakers and regulators, we have academics, we have user experience people, behavioral scientists, people who work in companies like Facebook, people who work in companies like Julian's, consumer advocates. We really try to get a mix, because what we find is if you don't have that mix, the debate ends up getting a bit stuck. It's really important to us to consider all sides of the questions we've set out in the report. So really would welcome any suggestions from you about people you think we should involve, or if you have any comments on the exercise. As Stephen said, we're trying to wrap this up and produce our final report around April time. So I'd welcome any feedback from you. Just approach me after the session or pick up one of my cards at the Facebook stand. But for now, I think we just need to say thank you very much. Thanks to the panel. Appreciate your points of view. We do have time for one final question if anyone has thought of one they'd love to get. Oh, we have, yes, thank you. You had a bit of trouble with the mic earlier, didn't you? So thank you for coming up front.
Thank you. Sorry, everyone, for keeping you away from your drinks for just a moment longer. You mentioned control and being able to control it, and we see all these different companies implementing different measures to be able to control your privacy settings. And you mentioned one of the aspects is understanding, but I think one of the aspects that wasn't quite mentioned was time. If I'm looking at the amount of companies that I interact with on a daily basis that use my data, I don't have time to control each and every one of them. Some browsers have implemented a do not track feature that some companies are already implementing. Is that perhaps a direction to go in the future as well, to increase the granularity that I can set in one central place, what my privacy settings are for all agents that are going to be using my data? Is that something that could be the future of the industry?
There's definitely innovation of that type in the market.
Yeah, it kind of depends, really. You don't have time to do control when you think you've got a legacy of 50 to 200 things to go back and do. You do have time to do control when each time you're going to do something new, it's a 30-second or 5-second or 10-second decision, right, for that particular item. And so, again, we've got to distinguish between going forwards and correcting the legacy mess. And I think it's important to be able to have control at a granular level, because we're all so different. Do not track's a different thing to me, right? But it's when I'm sharing my data, I have a different perception of what I'll share with my bank and my newspaper, the Times of London, compared to what you might want to share with your bank and your newspaper or somebody else. So I think having control granular is important. There will be some major levels of control as well, right? You know, I'm not interested. But don't think that it's impossible to fix, because it's, as you go forwards, each one is just a momentary decision. And no different, by the way, than what you decide to do when you walk into your butcher's and you tell them about your preferences for meat and the supermarket, whatever it may have been in the old days, verbally. You either came in and out quickly, or you just chatted for a while.
I think this question of time, this issue can be approached by summarization, simplification, or by delegation, because you have certain notion of your own privacy, you have your own default, and all the others don't know your default unless you clicked on something which gives you choice or not that much of choice. But if you were able to have a kind of consent agent who which carries out your decision within the seconds you mentioned. All the apps you use all day, or all the new apps you install all week, you don't have the time to read the terms and conditions, but perhaps your little tool, your little agents who bears your privacy default in it, has it. Perhaps that would be another innovative.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time. We won't keep you away from the drink any longer. Thank you to the panel, thank you to the audience, and as I said, follow up if you have any questions.